In this part of the video, I'm going to be talking to you about showing your work while you're solving math problems. And you might be wondering, why would something like this show up in a video about studying math effectively? Well, at some point you're going to run across a problem that you've forgotten how to do, or you don't remember the tricks to do it. So you're going to look back at your previous work. Well, what that means is that what you do right now is going to affect how you study in the future. So you should probably write down your work to solving problems as neatly and as much as you need to. So let's go through these bullet points then, starting with the first one. Now this one's the most obvious one. If you're turning it in to the professor, the best rule of thumb is show every step that gets you to your answer. Now, every single professor says at least once that you gotta show your work. So, if for no other reason, you should show your work when you turn in homework because they're going to mark off points, right? So, moving on to the second point, maybe there's a situation you're not turning it in for homework, you're just doing it to teach yourself, sort of, or to re-solidify some points. In that case, I would say that it's not as necessary to write out all the steps, and that it's more dependent upon the person that's doing the work. Right? So, in order to do this as a case-by-case basis, what I suggest to you is to ask yourself the question whenever you're working on a problem, will I be able to follow my work if I reread this? So, when you ask yourself this question, you should know the answer. You're probably going to be able to see, oh, I don't really know how I know how I got there because I just worked on it. But in the future, I won't see how I skipped that step, or like what step I skipped. So in that case, if you are inclined to write less work, you still should ask yourself this question so that way you at least write enough work to look back at it in the future. So on the board I have two examples here. This is the more bare bones, like just A, B, C, where you don't really write exactly what you're doing. The problem just sort of changes from step to step. So if you're not following something like this, or you wouldn't be able to follow something like this, I wouldn't recommend doing this. What I see more often from people starting out with algebra is they write down exactly what they did. This one sort of leaves the what they did out and just shows the results. This one says, okay, so I subtracted 4 here, and in here I divided by 2. Then I got my answer. So this one is a bit less bare bones, it's a bit more meaty, and it actually tells you when you reread the problem, this is what I did to get from here to here. Another thing that I've seen that's quite common is some people write up over here what they actually did. Like they write it out in words, because maybe the math is sort of, it makes your head spin, and it's more difficult to follow than just like some words to guide you along. So I've seen some people like write out to the side, okay, so I subtracted 4 from both sides to get rid of the 4 on the left. And then down here, I divided by 2 to get rid of the 2 in front of the x. And then that would help them in the future. So think about future you and whether or not you would be able to understand it. Now for the last part, this is true of whether you're turning it in for homework or it's for your own self-study. You should basically always do this. Have your work follow a pattern, a neat pattern that anyone can recognize. So a lot of the times I ask students like, hey, what are your notes on this topic? And they turn to the notes, and what I see is like, so they started over here, then they did some work over here, then they like wrote some stuff here, then they go back up here, and then they get their answer there. And it's just a mess, and it's not very easily followed. So what I would say to fix that is pick a pattern that works for you, right? And just stick to that pattern very rigidly. Like for example, this one, these are the two most common patterns I see. This one is just a vertical, like I write the problem, then I write the next part, then I write the next part, and I just keep going till I get my solution. Then we have this one. I write the problem, then I do an arrow thing, and I write the next part to the right, and I just keep going to the right until I get to my answer. Those are very common ones. Um, Now there are more complicated situations, like for example, maybe you have two pieces to the puzzle and you have to solve them and then like put them together to get your answer. In that case, I would recommend finding a pattern and following that pattern for each of the separate pieces. Um, but other than that, like just make sure that like you have a general pattern that you fall back on so that your work doesn't get too messy. Because if it gets too messy, let's say you're turning it in for homework, the professor is going to think, I don't know what you're saying here. And if you're keeping it for your own self studies, you're going to think, I don't know what I'm trying to write here. So the point of all of this, really, is to make it easier on yourself in the future. Make sure that you are going to be able to understand what's going on in the problem. And that's basically the gist of showing your work when you're solving a problem, is make sure that it's, as a fellow tutor of mine once said, make sure that you future-proof your work.